Coming up, an ESPN analyst makes a bold statement about the Iron Bowl, and Steve Spurrier makes a surprising statement about the Florida coaching search. It's all on the way next on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to AT&T SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. Good to have you with us in the program today, and it's going to be a fun one. A little later on, the executive director of the College Football Playoff, Bill Hancock, going to be with us. We broadcast live from Atlanta, the College Football Playoff National Championship game in Atlanta at the end of this season. He's obviously really excited about that. I think Atlantans and SEC fans are as well, because this town, our hometown, for a long time been kind of the capital city of the SEC.
Yeah, a bunch of cool things going on before and after the game, and also a look at the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I think that's always a good time.
So we'll talk to Bill Hancock coming up about that around 3:45. We'll also get into where a lot of these SEC teams are ranked in the College Football Playoff Top 25. We'll look forward to doing all of that. We'll also have your questions and comments on today's show as we kind of break down coaching rumors, the rankings from last night, and kind of everything in between. And, we knew that November was going to be a busy month for college football. That is certainly the case right now.
It's definitely the case. We get the news earlier today about Jeff Long out as the Arkansas AD, all kind of coaching searches going on. And the coaching, windmill, I guess you want to call it, the searching rumors, they continue to go on day by day.
Absolutely. So we'll kind of do all that and remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless. DirecTV, they'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's dive into the show the way we do each and every day to kick things off. It's our first and 10, the big news around the world of the SEC. And I actually want to start with something from last night. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee releases its new top 25. Auburn coming in at number 6 in the poll. Alabama does go all the way to number 1 because of the Georgia and the Notre Dame loss. Alabama gets a chance to be the top team in the poll. But if you ask some people, Alabama may be number 1, but maybe not the most dangerous team currently in the SEC. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. Joey Galloway, who's an ESPN analyst, breaking down how the committee kind of sort of saw things and how it might shake out in the SEC the rest of the way. Listen to the compliments that he gives Auburn compared to what he views as some concerns right now for Alabama. Tide fans, Tigers fans, do you agree? Take a listen.
Alabama, and honestly, and it has been a long time since I've said this, I would want to see Alabama rather than Auburn. When I watch the Alabama game, not just the linebackers, you see no white shirts in the backfield of Mississippi State. And that's that's what we recognize of Alabama is causing havoc up front.
So that's what he says, that Alabama, you got that problem with the linebackers. They're not getting in the backfield the way they have in the past. Maybe that was the case against Mississippi State. Maybe it's also the way they chose to defend Nick Fitzgerald. But there is an element in which, for me, it's more about the offensive side of the ball here. That when I look at what I see from Auburn, I do see an offense that just appears more explosive than what Alabama brings to the table.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when you look at what Mississippi State did last weekend, obviously you're going to look at the injuries at linebacking core. You're going to look at the way the defensive line played. I don't know that the jerseys being in the backfield, I don't know that plays into a lot to the way I kind of see this game playing out. I think that is kind of a Nick Saban game plan thing. I think the only time that if you're game planning for Nick Fitzgerald, the only time he can really kill you is when he rolls out of the pocket with his arm. So I think that probably was a little bit of a game plan going on. But definitely when you look at the way that Auburn was able to play this Georgia team in the front seven, and the front seven at Georgia right now that I'm not sure is not a ton better than what Alabama has put on the field the last couple of weeks, I think it's dangerous to look at if you're an Alabama fan. I don't want to agree with Joey Galloway because, Joey Galloway always has these crazy hot takes about a lot of things going on, but I tend to lean the way that he's leaning. I think that Alabama's been a more consistent team, but right now, I don't disagree that Auburn's probably more dangerous.
In the comment section, Jonathan Barefoot says Auburn 43, Bama 24 in the Iron Bowl. There is no doubt that right now Auburn fans are riding high on the basis of that win against Georgia last Saturday. And as much as Jordan-Hare Stadium was rocking and rolling for that one, it's going to be rocking and rolling again for Alabama here 2 Saturdays from right now.
Yeah, 43-24 would be the biggest, most lopsided victory in Alabama since 2003. So that would definitely send a ripple effect across the college football playoff, especially with them being the number 1 team. I definitely think it's an uphill climb. It's going to be an incredibly hostile environment. I've played in that environment before. That Auburn student section, if you can start to pin Alabama back, becomes a huge part of this game. And like I said, an uphill climb for this offense and this defense to be able to mount on Auburn and pin this game down.
Beth Halliburton Shelton says blah, 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 roll tide, essentially insinuating that Alabama's kind of been here before with people making hot takes about them. Jeremy Pettis also reminding us about Joey Galloway. This is the same guy that picked Baylor to win the Big 12.
Yeah.
So not all of his opinions, like any of us, not all of those opinions are going to come true. But Jeffrey Moore, an example of another Auburn fan who does feel good about where Auburn is right now. And I don't fault Auburn fans for feeling that way. And I say that as a guy who was in Jordan-Hare Stadium and obviously hoped Georgia won the game last Saturday. I saw firsthand how good Auburn was. Talked about it during the offseason as well, but saw it firsthand on Saturday. And I do think Auburn fans right now have a right to crow, but ultimate bragging rights in the SEC come after you beat Alabama, not before you play them.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a dangerous hill right now, because what you don't want is a team that's feeling really good about themselves and going into the ULM game and sleepwalking through that game and then kind of feeling really good about themselves going to the Iron Bowl. I don't foresee that. I think that Gus Malzahn is going to have his team ready to play. But you're right. They should feel really good about themselves. That was a huge defeat of a #1 team. That shows them that they can beat a #1 team after they lost to Clemson earlier in the year. And they have another one coming right into their backyard. The fact that this game is in Auburn, I think, gives them an extra little motivation factor to say, hey, we can definitely do this.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, let me quickly ask you, did the committee get it right with Alabama at #1, Auburn at 6, going ahead of Georgia at 7? Is that the way that you kind of would have ranked this last night?
I definitely would. That's the way I'm kind of handicapping things in the SEC right now. I think there's some teams in between, some out-of-conference teams, some from the Big Ten and other conferences you can look at and kind of mess things up. But I think when you look at 1, 6, 7 for Alabama, Auburn, and Georgia, I think that was the way to go.
I think for me, while I don't have a problem with Auburn being ahead of Georgia, I think it's a little bit silly to say that teams like Miami and Wisconsin are better than Georgia and Auburn right now. If you're really ranking it basis on the best 4 teams, I think Auburn and Georgia just
right.
I just think they have the look of being a better team than 2 undefeateds, Miami and Wisconsin. The advanced metrics back that up. I think performance on the field, the eye test, folks, I think that kind of backs that up. Yeah. I just think that Georgia and Auburn are both better than Wisconsin and Miami.
And I tend to agree with you, but you have to somehow award consistency. You have to award teams that are winning in September and October and not just in November. Listen, I think Ohio State would be put ahead of a couple of those teams if we just awarded teams that are playing well right now, especially with the performance they put out last week. I just think that you have to find a way to kind of balance that. Who played well in September and who's playing well right now? And I think for right now, knowing the matchups that are coming up, they've done a pretty good job.
Let me move on. We'll talk more about the playoff rankings throughout our show, including when College Football Playoff Executive Director Bill Hancock joins us around 45 minutes after the hour. Before that, though, a lot of coaching search rumors we got to get to, and that's the subject of item number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And boy, things are getting a little weird with the Florida coaching search. Let me start here with a guy that you would think ought to know the situation at Florida, given his sort of special ambassador status with the program. But former Gators coach Steve Spurrier was in the Buddy Martin radio show today, and here is what Spurrier says about the Florida coaching search. Florida will have an excellent coach here in 3 to 4 weeks. The coach is with his team now. The coach we're going to hire is probably, I would almost 100% say, is coaching his team today, this weekend, and through the end of the season, and maybe through the bowl game. That's an insinuation from Spurrier that Florida's next coach is a current college coach, would eliminate Chip Kelly if what Spurrier's saying tells the truth. Now, this coming on the heels of last night, and even on our show yesterday, we talked about the rumors that there was a private plane leaving Gainesville, Florida, heading towards Bristol, Connecticut. The thought was, well, this is obviously Scott Strickland, the athletic director, meeting with Chip Kelly there where he works in Bristol as an analyst for ESPN. But then a photo on social media emerged last night of Scott Strickland speaking to a Florida journalism class. Here's the tweet from Strickland, who says, just finished speaking to a sports administration class, UF campus, engaging group. They asked some good questions, #GoGators. A lot of people took that as sort of a subtle troll job to say, y'all think I'm in Bristol, but I'm still here in Gainesville. No private plane with me on it. Took off from Florida heading towards Connecticut. So I got to ask you, do these 2 pieces of evidence combine to suggest that Chip Kelly's not going to be the next Florida coach?
I think they have to, and I think, listen, it's hard for me to take anybody at their word right now. I think Scott Strickland is really enjoying this entire process. He's been tweeting the Mark Twain quotes, and he's been, getting on message boards and talking about hot takes that aren't true, and I think that just goes into that category. This is not to say that he didn't walk into a class yesterday around noon and then tweet this picture out around 3:40. When he's on his way or on the airplane.
Yeah, because there are other pictures.
I mean, it's who knows right now when you talk about Florida right now. Steve Spurrier's comments do leave me as a head scratcher. I think that he's obviously trying to push maybe the talking points in the direction of Dan Mullen and Scott Frost and whoever else is out there kind of controlling their own team right now, but. I don't know. I think that we've kind of played ping pong with this entire subject. Will McElwain get fired? Will he not? Then he gets fired. And is it Chip Kelly? Is it Matt Campbell? Is it Dan Mullen? Dan Mullen, Scott Strickland thing. I'm not sure where to go with it anymore. I'm really not.
So I told you earlier this week that I thought the Chip Kelly stuff was all subterfuge on the part of Florida, and I think there's a great reason why they'd do that. Think about the other two potential top candidates. It's Dan Mullen, who has his Mississippi State job or could go to Tennessee, at least we think, or it's Scott Frost, who probably not going to stay at UCF, but certainly could go to his alma mater, Nebraska. So you have both those instances where those guys have leverage against Florida. Every negotiation is won by the party who wants it least. Florida needs its own leverage here to say, well, we're going to hire Chip Kelly. We don't have to hire you. I always thought that was the case here. But I got to tell you, I started second-guessing my own opinion when people who know more than me about this situation were not skeptical of Kelly. It seemed to all be happening very fast. But now the brakes get pumped, and for now, I think my original opinion probably was true, that Florida probably liked the idea of the Kelly rumors being out there, even if Strickland was publicly refuting them, because it gave them some leverage in the negotiation with the coach they really want, including Dale Bolton in our comment section, who says he thinks that Scott Frost is going to be the next Florida coach. Flirting with Chip Kelly may have helped Florida with its negotiations behind the scenes with Scott Frost, and maybe that's what all of this was about. We just don't know.
And to me, that could fit in the Dan Mullen category as well. When you're looking for a possible replacement coach down there in Florida, if it is Dan Mullen, I'm sure that Dan Mullen doesn't want it to come out, just yet that he might be taking a job at Florida. He's probably pushing those guys up there and saying, "Listen, you know what? I'm very interested right now, but I don't want to talk about it, and I want y'all to kind of leverage this situation away from me and get the spotlight off of me." That might be what you're dealing with right now if you're Scott Strickland in Florida. Maybe Steve Spurrier's trying to do the same thing, put it out there and kind of push people away from Chip Kelly. To me, this is such a toss-up when you talk about Florida. I think it's such a good job. I think that it has, national title implications for years to come, whoever they hire right now. I think they've got to get this one right if you're Scott Strickland. And so a lot of pressure being put in a lot of different directions and a ton of people hearing different things. We're watching plane flights. We're looking at AD's tweets about who they're talking to in class. And it's going to be crazy to watch this thing kind of fall out.
Bo Molinari says that Dan Mullen's not going anywhere. We're going to have a little more on that on our program later on. I know a lot of the Mississippi State fans are really proud of Coach Mullen. I know they'll be hoping to hold on to him, and I'm sure they believe what Bo says there in the comment section, so we'll talk more about that. But by the way, Esteban Estevez says Bama's the new Florida. They're catching breaks here and there. They're barely getting by on those wins. We'll talk more about those playoff rankings coming up in just a moment, too. Let me move on now to item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Speaking of those coaching rumors, we just dealt with the Florida coaching rumors. Let's deal here for a moment with the Jon Gruden rumors that, once again today, they just don't seem to die, including our buddy who we played for you a couple times, who's written these great songs about the Tennessee situation, saying goodbye to Butch Jones, the state of affairs there on Rocky Top. Well, he's also weighed in now with another great ballad here, this time kind of mocking Charlie Daniels, a Tennessee guy himself, and the song Devil Went Down to Georgia. This time it's more about Jon Gruden coming to the SEC. Take a listen to this. It's kind of a reflection of how some Tennessee fans currently feel about Jon Gruden. Take a listen.
Jon Gruden went down to Knoxville. He was looking for a team to steal. They were in a bind because they were way behind. They knew they had made a bad deal. When he came across this young man, he said, 10 million, then we'll talk. Then John Curry jumped about 10 feet high and said, boy, let me tell you what. I guess you didn't know.
So I think this guy's incredibly talented. I think he's incredibly funny. And by the way, Tony Paul, the guy who writes this song, on his initial tweet, he's like shouting out at, Feinbaum, SEC Network, Clay Travis. We've given you more publicity than anybody or any of those shows have. How about you holler at your folks over here at AT&T SEC Country Live?
Yeah, listen, I do think he's talented. And he kind of, like we've talked about on the show before, he kind of talks from down here and like he's got a dip in his lip. I think he's good.
Yeah, listen, I think he reflects a lot of the way that Tennessee fans feel right now. And you better believe if Tony Paul's writing the song, some Tennessee fans want Jon Gruden. And then, there's the thought that maybe Gruden himself would also be open to Tennessee. The reason we think that might be the case is because of a fairly cryptic message he gave on the Mike and Mike radio program. Mike Golick, one of the hosts, asked him, jobs open at Tennessee, your name's connected to it. Gruden gives a long answer. I'm not sure he reveals too much, but he certainly doesn't say, no way in heck am I going to Knoxville. Here's what Gruden said on Mike and Mike on ESPN. Here we go.
Your name always comes up. This time, with the Tennessee head coaching job, your name comes up. What say you about that?
Well, you know what, Mike? I haven't talked to anybody, and all I really have in my life is my family and football. That's about it. And I'm real sensitive to the coaches that are out there coaching, so I don't speculate. I just love football. I'm trying to hang on to the job I have. I'm very fortunate to be with the people I'm with. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I just know this. I'm going to continue to give my best effort to the game, stay prepared, and I love Monday Night Football. Don't plan on leaving, but as you know in life, you never say never to nothing.
So listen, I mean, that's obviously an intentional effort to leave the door open to coach somewhere, be it Tennessee, somewhere else, or to be flirted with by schools or NFL franchises that have opening coaching jobs. And that's the way that you interpret that, because if you don't interpret it that way, what Gruden said there over the course of about 30 seconds doesn't really mean anything. Yeah. I mean, the only way to take that is Gruden likes the idea that his name comes up in coaches searches like the one going on at Tennessee right now.
I think he's enjoying it. I think Jon Gruden's sitting here looking at the situation going, you know what, if I can just keep this going along, I'll never have to pay for another beer in the state of Tennessee ever again. Every time I go to Nashville, every time I go to Knoxville or Memphis or whatever it is, I don't have to buy my own self a beer. I think he's right, though. You never say never, and I think that, you heard the $10 million figure start to come into that song. I think if somebody's throwing $10 million at you for anything, you are willing to pay attention. Maybe that's why he's not, brushing this under the rug.
But you got to, though, look at the whole picture here altogether. Yes, that's the quote from Gruden that backs up what some other reports have been, that he would be open to returning to coaching and would maybe be open to taking the Tennessee job. But there are also strong reports that are diametrically 100% in the opposite direction. Take this from Pete Russell from footballscoop.com. I mean, I'll show you this quote from him that kind of, strongly refutes that. Scott Russell, I should say, not Pete, but Scott Russell says, Jon Gruden has no interest in being the next head coach at Tennessee. This is not happening. No one is being contacted about potentially joining his staff. Move on, Vol fans. Now, Scott Russell sort of made his little niche in the industry to kind of cover coaching searches and coaching changes. That's a pretty strong report. Now, I can't guarantee with 100% veracity that he's right, but I can guarantee this. A guy that reports this news for a living is not going to make some emphatic statement like that unless he had good sources telling him otherwise. So there appears to be a contradiction with what Gruden said on TV and what people are saying about him kind of behind the scenes here. And that's a real head scratcher.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, it's kind of, to me, if he had come out and said, you know what, I don't think this guy's going to take the job, or I'm hearing that he's kind of leaning away from, he just said, get over it, Vol fans. I mean, this is not going to happen. He's not talking to any assistant coaches. I think that's really, you're right, kind of stepping out on that limb right now and being so emphatic about how he feels about this story, I think kind of tells, it definitely kind of, echoes how I feel about it. It's like Jon Gruden every day, there's like some kind of snippet that kind of comes out about Jon Gruden, and I don't understand it. I've told you before, even if they're able to get him, then I don't think it's a good hire. And so I think there is a sliver of Vol fans that are still in love with the idea of Jon Gruden being in Knoxville. But for the most part, the people I talk to, it's just kind of, you know what, if that happens, great.
By the way, I got more on Jon Gruden, but Scott Frank in the comment section was asking us about our helmet configuration here. We got the Florida helmet next to the Auburn helmet. Listen, here's the issue. Normally for our week, we like to put the helmets of the matchups. Like last week we had Georgia Auburn. This week we got Georgia Kentucky. The problem is y'all SEC teams this week are all playing a bunch of FCS teams, and they either don't make FCS helmets or we don't have them. So we just had to sort of rework the configuration there a little bit.
We had to mess up the configuration to not reflect teams that played last week or teams that are playing next week. Just put teams next to each other that won't be playing each other.
So that's the issue with the helmets this week. It's a little tough, and there's so many non-conference games against teams that don't have helmets that we don't have. But back to Gruden here for a moment. If Gruden is doing this on purpose, he's the worst of the worst. I mean, I'm just telling you right now. If Gruden is allowing this flirtation to take place, and as Russell from Football Scoop said, he's not taking the job, that makes Gruden an incredibly bad guy. And I mean that from the time that he showed up at that Tennessee football game, knowing he'd be put on television, doing interviews like this when he says you never say never. If he's allowing this sort of Tennessee flirtation to go on at the expense of Vol fans, who he ought to care about because of his son's relationship with the university, I think that makes Gruden an incredibly bad guy. I mean that. I mean, I think that you are doing fans wrong to kind of pump up your own ego, and that makes Gruden, to me, despicable.
Well, listen, I said it when Butch Jones was still in place as a head coach, that if he's showing up at games and doing all this stuff back then, he's the head of this Fired Football Coaches of America thing that he always wears the visor for on ESPN, then I think that was a bad look. If he's going to lead fans on and say you never say never, then I don't have that much of an issue with him right now. But to me, this bed was made a couple of years ago when this flirtation that he's never been able to quite put it to bed, and says one day he'll get back in coaching, and he still watches film and tells all these stories and gives all these interviews. I think he does. I think he loves the spotlight. I don't think it's about right now. To me, this has been going on for 5-10 years.
Quick final comment on this subject. Alan Frazier says back in the day there was a reporter who said that Saban would not go to Alabama. Saban himself said he wasn't going to Alabama. The next week, Saban was getting off the plane in Alabama. I think that's a really interesting comparison that Alan Frazier makes to the Gruden situation. Here's the thing, though, if I was an Alabama fan back then and a Tennessee fan right now. Back then, you were talking about a coach who, when he was LSU, had won a national championship. Saban was worth the effort and the trouble. He may have been, lying, but it was worth kind of chasing him down on that because you knew you had a home run hire if you could make it. Jon Gruden does not have Nick Saban's resume. Yes, he won a Super Bowl, but college and pro football are very different. I don't believe that Jon Gruden's worth the trouble. He may not want to come. He may want to come. But the truth is, I just think Tennessee can hire somebody better.
I think they can too. And listen, what's to say that Jon Gruden doesn't want to go back to the NFL? If he really wants to go back and get head coaching, the Tampa job might come open this year. The New York Giants job might come open this year. He might find his way back into NFL coaching before he ever takes a job where you have to recruit and rebuild a program at a place like Tennessee.
By the way, I've opened up the can of worms with the helmet configuration. People are noticing our Alabama helmet doesn't have the right number next to it because of the 16 national championships or however many Alabama's claiming this week.
I don't know what the number is, but it's way more than Georgia's got. So.
I probably deserve that. Let me just move on to a different subject. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless Direct TV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. That is Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. Great to have you with us in the program today. What do you say we keep the coaching rumors going here as we move on to item number 4 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list? We've heard from a lot of Mississippi State fans over the last couple of days saying that Dan Mullen's not going anywhere. He's not taking the Tennessee job or any other job that might come available. He's happy in Starkville, Mississippi. He's said that himself over and over again. And as a reflection of what I think that they are saying in Starkville, what Hail State folks are kind of feeling right now, I thought that Brandon Walker, who from time to time makes an appearance here on AT&T SEC Country Live, made a pretty strong statement on his own podcast, the SEC Country Mississippi State podcast, about what he thinks of Mullen's situation and what Mullen might have to do to convince the media that he's actually happy in the maroon and white. Here's Brandon Walker speaking on behalf of a lot of Mississippi State fans.
So Dan Mullen, I guess, is going to have to come out at the 50-yard line of Davis Wade Stadium, take an orange sweatshirt or a Davy Crockett coonskin cap and set it on fire to get the message to people that he's not going to Tennessee, that Dan Mullen's not going to be the next coach at Tennessee. The man, in his press conferences, he talks about the job he has, how much he loves it, how much he's happy here, and I believe him. And I have no reason not to believe him. I see a product he's building, I see a program he's building, and I see no reason for somebody like Dan Mullen to leave Mississippi State to go to Tennessee, and I don't think he sees a reason to go to Tennessee.
Michael Kleiber in the comment section says, Brandon Walker's always right. Obviously, Brandon, the host of the Mississippi State podcast. On this particular regard, do you think that Brandon's right about Dan Mullen and that it's the media who can't get it through their head that Mullen's not going anywhere?
Well, I think he's right to a certain extent. I think that right now, when you look at Dan Mullen, and if you're looking at the Tennessee job and you're kind of weighing out those options, I don't think there's a ton of reason for him to jump ship at Mississippi State, a program he really has built from the ground up. But I think when you look at the games that Dan Mullen has endured this year, it kind of tells the story of the history of Mississippi State to me. You're gonna have to play teams like Auburn. You're gonna have to play teams like Georgia. You're gonna lose most games you've played to Alabama right now when you're Dan Mullen. You've never beaten them, and so I think that at some point you try to get out of that shadow and get to a place where you can bring in those top 5 signing classes. I think Dan Mullen wants to win a national championship, and I don't know if that road runs through Starkville. I think that maybe one day it could, but for right now, I'm not sure that road runs through Starkville.
Well, what I think that Dan Mullen really wants to do, I think he'd like to win a national championship, but what he really wants to do is be able to coach somewhere where he knows he's never going to get fired. And here's the thing about Mississippi State. Mississippi State has SEC expectations. It's a tough job there because you split a small state with another SEC school, and even on probation, Ole Miss is going to still get some of its players, and obviously LSU gets kids from Louisiana, the Texas situation. Mississippi State does a great job of kind of mining those Mississippi junior colleges for talent. They do a great job of that, but that's still a crowded corridor to get talent in, and obviously at some point in time, it's an uphill climb for Mississippi State. They're happy with him right now because he's been winning. He makes a lot of money. But at some point in time, Mississippi State fans are going to say, for the money we're paying him, we want more than just a number 16 ranking. We want more than just this. I mean, Mississippi State fans are going to get tired of their level of success the same way all other SEC fans get spoiled eventually. I think Mullen knows that. That's why I believe that Mullen might want to move on, because as much as Mississippi State fans like Michael Clyburn think they would never turn on Mullen, Mullen's seen enough examples in the SEC where rabid fan bases did turn on their own coach to know that you got to move on before that happens.
Yeah, and I agree with you to that extent. I think that when you look at what he's been able to do there, I think there is an issue of maybe one day that fans get tired of, the third place in the SEC West finishes. I think there's also a chance that you get on the flip side of that and Dan Mullen says, you know what, I'm winning 9 games at Mississippi State. I'm taking this program to new heights. There's coaches out there that are making $10 million a year now. How come I'm not making at least in the upper third of that? You know what I'm saying? How come Dan Mullen can't get $7+ million a year from a big SEC program? That's another outcome, in my opinion. To me, sometimes these coaching positions have a shelf life, and a lot of times it's right in that 10-year range. And I think Dan Mullen's approaching that. I think that maybe when you look at what he's been able to do, he hasn't been able to get Mississippi State to stay to get to national prominence and stay there. Maybe he has reached his ceiling there.
I hate to be implied. That's not what I mean to be here on AT&T SEC Country Live, but I think Mississippi State fans, one thing you ought to be aware of is all the times that Mullen's name is connected to other coaching jobs, you're kidding yourself if that's always coming from a source outside of Mullen. You don't get connected to this many jobs over the years without it coming from somebody connected to Dan Mullen. Now, the opportunity hasn't been right for him yet, but I'm just a believer that some of this rumor mongering about Dan Mullen comes from sources close to Dan Mullen.
I agree with you. I don't think you can just laugh him off, if you're a Mississippi State fan. I mean, if I'm putting my money down right now, my money is that Dan Mullen will be the head coach at Mississippi State next year. That's just how I feel. I don't know that the situation is right elsewhere for him to jump ship and take some kind of payday and head down to Florida, head over to Tennessee, or possibly even Texas A&M that comes up. I don't think the situation's right now. But if you're telling me that you look at Dan Mullen and you see a guy that's going to be a lifer in Starkville, Mississippi, and he's going to stay there for another 20 years, I don't see that scenario either. I think the reason his name keeps coming up is because his agent is floating us out there and seeing what other kind of possibilities are out there on the horizon for him.
James Carroll says Mullen to Florida, and that's a job I don't think he's going to take. I take people at their word close to Mullen who say he doesn't want that job. I believe that's true.
And it possibly is. I think if you're Dan Mullen, you have to kind of weigh the risk. Hey, I could be the head coach at Mississippi State for another 10 years. I could go down to Gainesville and be fired in 2. I think that you have to kind of weigh those options.
Jeff Hefner in the comments section says it's Russian collusion, just like the election. Speaking of that, item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Jeff Sessions, former congressman, now a member of the Trump administration, speaking in front of Congress, being asked a lot of tough questions. But the final question he's asked has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with anything like that. But it's the kind of question in the state of Alabama that can get you as much trouble as anything. Take a listen to him when he's asked, hey, is it Alabama or Auburn in the Iron Bowl? And listen to how emphatically Sessions responds. Kind of interesting when a politician wades into these waters. Take a look.
One last question, Alabama or Auburn?
The gentleman
War Eagle.
time has expired.
So I like that when a politician, and I don't care, Alabama, Auburn. I'm not a Alabama, Auburn fan. I don't, care about the politics of Jeff Sessions here. But we see so many politicians get in trouble because they're afraid to kind of go on the record.
Yeah.
They're a Cubs fan and a White Sox fan. They're whatever. You're kind of both sides of the fence. But in Alabama, where they can get you in trouble, I mean, Tommy Tuberville, people said he can't be governor of the whole state because he only coached one of the 2 teams, and Alabama fans don't like him. Sessions going on record before Congress saying War Eagle, you're not an Auburn guy, but you got to respect that a little bit, don't you?
I definitely respect it. I think most Alabama fans even respect it. I think anytime you're testifying in front of Congress about Russian collusion in the elections, and you're able to have some kind of Auburn tagline thrown in there, then I think it's a big deal. I think a lot of football fans in the state of Alabama respect anybody that picks a side. They just don't want people to be in the middle.
What I think is really funny is for the people outside the world of college football who hear Jeff Sessions in front of Congress shout the word war. They're like, what in the world is he talking about?
What's funny is I almost just said that word on here, and I probably have before, but today's not the day. Too much on the line in a couple of
Item number 6 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So this, to me, I think is a pretty interesting debate. Alex Hickey, who covers LSU for SECCountry.com, wrote about an interesting thing that Darius Guy is going to be able to accomplish after this weekend. Let me read to you what Hickey writes here. He says, ever since he played his last game in Auburn 1985, Bo Jackson's been the SEC's leader in career yards per carry. But with just 2 more carries, Guy's going to get to 400. That's going to qualify him to be at the top of the record book as the SEC's new all-time leader in the yards per carry category. Now, it's worth pointing out a lot of websites sort of make the minimum number of carries different, so not every website reflects what Alex is writing here, but the SEC official rankings require 400 carries. So Darius Guy is about to be the all-time SEC leader in yards per carry for a career. That feels like the hallmark of a great running back. But do you consider Darius Guice to be that?
I don't consider Darius Guice to be on the wall of fame as far as SEC running backs go. I think if you're giving me 10 running backs, if you're giving me 20 running backs in SEC history, I don't think Darius Guice is there. I think I need to see another year. I think that when you talk about 400 carries and you look at the greats that have come through the SEC, I mean, what did Herschel Walker have? 900 carries.
Yeah.
Derrick Henry had 600. Kevin Falk, a guy at LSU, had 850. And so I think 400 right now is just not a high enough mark. I think you look at, his option the last couple of years, I guess not option, his ability the last couple of years to share carries with Leonard Fournette kind of overshadows kind of the legend that is Darius Geis. I think that if he comes back next year and is able to have a great year and still average that number of yards per carry, then I think that maybe he's going to make a claim for being on the Mount Rushmore. But for me right now, I just haven't seen enough of him.
Most people think that Geis probably going to the NFL after this season, and I think that you're touching on a point that I think is important to me too. When you think about the all-time great backs in the 80s, Bo Jackson at Auburn, Herschel Walker, Georgia, other considerations you might get, including a guy like Kevin Falk had a great career at LSU. That was back in an era when you got a lot more carries per game than what you get now, and everybody in the opposing defense knew you were getting the football. I think one of the reasons why modern-day running backs can't be in that all-time great, to use your phrase, the Mount Rushmore, it's just easier for running backs now because the prevalence of the spread offense.
Well, and that's possibly true. I mean, I listen. I don't know that Derrick Henry's in the top 20, but I'm definitely throwing him up there too. And he's a guy, like I said. I mean, he had 600 carries at Alabama, and he's sharing backfields with T.J. Yeldon and Kenyon Drake and all these other people too. And he's still a guy that got the ball a lot towards the end of his career. I also look at a guy like Darren McFadden, who played in kind of a strange style of offense throughout. Yeah. This guy's 700, 800
a lot of wildcat carries.
I think that you kind of put almost Darius Geis right now in the category of like a Felix Jones who didn't have a ton of carries, or maybe even go back to Auburn. Was it Rudy Johnson in like 2002 or 2003? Played like 1 year at Auburn, was fantastic, but only played the one season. I think that his yard per carries is great, but I don't know if you can put him on the Mount Rushmore with one season.
I think that's a really interesting point of view, that maybe 400 is not enough carries to really be an all-time great running back. It's actually a really interesting point. Let me remind you, that's Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. We're going to talk in just a little bit to Bill Hancock. He's the executive director of the College Football Playoff. He'll be live in studio with us. We'll talk to him about the rankings from last night with Alabama at number 1, the rest of the SEC. We'll do all that coming up on the program. But before we get to that, we were just talking about LSU a moment ago. Speaking of the Tigers, a former LSU player, an alumnus making good on as a broadcaster, is Booger McFarland. And last night on ESPN, this is the subject of item number 7 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list, Booger McFarland weighing in on the situation at Georgia. Georgia got blown out by Auburn last Saturday. A lot of folks are kind of reeling in the aftermath of that. Some Georgia fans wondering, is this still the kind of team that can be a college football playoff contender? Can this team win the SEC championship? Well, McFarland told any Georgia fan on the fence and any Georgia critic around the country not to give up on the Dogs just yet. Here's what he said on ESPN.
As far as Georgia's concerned, don't be so quick to throw Georgia away. Jake Fromm, he had confidence early in the season. He didn't have confidence at it. If he gets some confidence, George, don't throw the Bulldogs away just yet. Don't throw them away.
So he says don't throw the Bulldogs away just yet. Now, from a ranking standpoint, that's obviously true. Number 7 in the country with a chance to play either number 1 or number 6, depending on where they're ranked right now in the SEC championship game. That gives Georgia the springboard that it needs to get into the playoff. That's not a question worth asking you. The better question for you is Georgia, based on what you saw on Saturday, good enough to win that game in December?
I think they are, and listen, I mentioned this today on your podcast that I think that this was Georgia's worst game of the season. I think it was Auburn's best game of the season. Anytime you kind of match those two up, especially when you look at what happened in the second half, you're going to get lopsided towards the end of the game. I think that if you're a Georgia fan out there and you're kind of trying to weigh what you saw on Saturday with what you want to see for the next couple of weeks, here's something you have to understand. This team can put its back against the wall and start to fight its way out. I think that anytime you look at a team, and Nick Saban used to say this all the time, the best teams are the ones that don't have to lose to learn a lesson. And that used to be true in the area of the BCS when you couldn't really lose a game a lot of the times and you could still try to make a run with one loss. Right now, this scenario is the college football playoff. And if you do lose a game, you have to learn a lot of lessons from it. And I think Georgia's going to do that. I think they go in and watch the film, maybe look like they were out physical, learned a little bit about what they are on the road and what Jake Fromm's going to see on the road in some of these environments, and maybe they learn a lot from it and can bounce back from that loss.
You were on my show, Dog Nation Daily, today. It's the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Obviously, there's still a lot of talk around that show about what happened to Auburn last week and the physical dominance that Auburn showed. pushing around the defensive line of scrimmage, offensive line as well. I ask you, is that the kind of thing that can be improved in a couple of weeks? Because some people might say physically stronger one time, physically stronger again in just a few weeks later. But you said that there are techniques that can give Georgia an advantage that wasn't able to utilize last Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you have in Georgia, when you look at their game plan going forward and what Jim Chaney and Mel Tucker were bringing to the table as far as those lines of scrimmage, they've manned up against everybody this year. They've manned up against every team they face, and they've been able to run the ball and stop the run. So you're going to go into this Auburn game with the same game plan. You don't want to all of a sudden throw a curveball at your players with something you haven't been doing all year. I think that when you get into that rematch, that maybe you do start to do the things you haven't done. I think maybe you can slant and stunt the defensive line. A lot of the ways that teams like Texas A&M and John Chavis have been facing teams this year. You slant, you stunt, you move people around, you blitz through the A-gaps. Maybe you'll see a little bit more of that blitzing from Kirby Smart and company in this rematch.
I'm going to say this as a Georgia fan. The next couple of weeks are going to be very hard for Georgia fans. The reason why is because what happened against Auburn, you can't get retribution for that against Kentucky. Even if Georgia wins by 40 points on Saturday, people will say that's just Kentucky. What happens if you play a good team again? Georgia Tech, in-state rival, beat Georgia last season, but the conversation will still be very much the same way. It's a long 3-week wait. Hopefully these are 2 wins for Georgia, at least from a dog fan perspective. But it's a long 3-week wait to get to the kind of opponent that Georgia can actually prove itself against. So it's one thing to have Booger McFarland talking good about Georgia on TV. Georgia fans need to see a performance on the field against an elite team to believe what McFarland's saying there.
I agree with you, and I think if you are on the Georgia coaching staff, if you're a Georgia fan, you have to understand that this is a slow build back to where you want to be. You don't have to dive right into it Monday morning and have this bloodied physical in practice. I know a lot of those guys in the locker room are going to want to. They're embarrassed from the game this last weekend, but understand that Kentucky is Kentucky, and you should be able to go out and out-physical them again this week before you get to some of the overreactionary type coaches things that sometimes you see in SEC football.
Let me do item number 8 here in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. A lot of coaching rumors in today's show. This is an example of maybe the most surprising of them all. It starts with Pete Russell, who we quoted from earlier from footballscoop.com. Here's what he's written this week about a name potentially emerging for the Tennessee job that I did not expect for us to be talking about. Here's what Russell wrote about Jimbo Fisher. More than one coach has mentioned to us that he's heard Jimbo Fisher's willing to listen. This one makes no sense to us here at Football Scoop, but it's a data point insofar as how odd it is that it's even being whispered. Why Jimbo would want to leave the FSU lifestyle to recruit on a plane, meaning not a lot of in-state recruits in Tennessee, more often than not is a head-scratcher. But we're sharing what we're hearing. That's Scott Russell from Football Scoop about the candidacy of Jimbo Fisher to Tennessee. Mike Griffith, who covers the Tennessee Vols for SECCountry.com, makes frequent appearances here on AT&T SEC Country Live, was also in our Tennessee podcast for SECCountry.com. And as surprising as it may be to many, Mike also thinks that Fisher is a legitimate, realistic name for the Vols. Here's how Mike explained that earlier this morning.
Well, I think it's very realistic. I mean, he entertained leaving last year for LSU. I think Tennessee's a better fit for him than Texas A&M as far as the recruiting base that he works with, as far as, where Jimbo's been. He is a West Virginia native, which is obviously closer to Tennessee than Texas A&M, and he played college football in Birmingham at Sanford right there. So I think he's a better fit for here in terms of the recruiting base that he's built up. I feel like Jimbo Fisher is the most realistic guy at this stage that Tennessee would pursue.
So, Tyler Mann in the comment section says that Florida State doesn't want Jimbo Fisher to leave, but Jimbo does want out of Florida State. I find that to possibly be true. I think what I said about Dan Mullen early in the show could also be true for Jimbo Fisher. He won a national championship in 2013, had an undefeated team, but all of a sudden 2013 starts to feel like a long time ago. We almost got in a fight with one of the fans during one of the games this year. That's kind of evidence that it's not hunky-dory and rosy there in Tallahassee, Florida. So I could see Fisher leaving Florida State, but not to go to Tennessee, and it's because of what Russell said at Football Scoop. Florida State is a hotbed for recruiting, not just the state of Florida, but that Florida panhandle in particular where Tallahassee is located. Tallahassee geographically is just below the southwest corner of Georgia, which is like Colquitt County and, a lot of really, really rich talent areas. That south northwestern part of the state of Florida, also very talent rich. You don't leave that place, a place where you can get players, to go to a place like Tennessee where you have to go outside your state just to get 25 guys every year. You just don't do that.
Right. Yeah, and listen, you mentioned those couple of geographic locations. Also, got to look at Alabama. He goes into gets Jameis Winston. That when you look at South Alabama, that's a place loaded with talent. That's guys like Julio Jones coming out of South Alabama. So I'm with you. I think Jimbo Fisher has done an incredible job recruiting. I just don't know that Jimbo Fisher. I think sometimes he looks at some of these other jobs around the country, these SEC jobs. Look at what Tennessee fans are clamoring for, what Florida fans are clamoring for. Some of the facilities that Kirby Smart's had built down in Athens right now. I don't know that he feels that same love at Florida State. He's made so many comments on the record about can he get back? Can his assistant coaches be paid more? Can we get the facilities up to date down at Florida State? Maybe there is a little inkling that he wants out. I think another half of that is saying that maybe he is floating these rumors about so he can get more money for some of those things, make those Florida State boosters a little uneasy. But I believe the whispers. I really do. I know that it's crazy. I think that Jimbo Fisher would wind up at a place like Tennessee, but I definitely think he has the feelers out there and seeing what other jobs are open.
Frank Crowder says he could see him at Texas A&M more so than Tennessee. I agree with Frank on that. This feels like if he's leaving, it feels more like a Texas A&M situation than a Tennessee situation because Texas A&M's a place it's just easier to get players.
Yeah, I have to agree with that too. I don't know that you'll get him at the at the height that you did at Florida State. I think you'll have to do a little bit more coaching, but maybe he would feel more comfortable in the long run. I think that Jimbo Fisher, honestly, I think the Florida State's boosters probably have taken a hit in this last year with the way the team's performing on the field. Maybe they're like, you know what, we don't have to scramble to keep this guy here. Maybe we can find another head coach too. I think it's going to be interesting to see this one play out as well.
James Crump says that Fisher would be perfect at Texas A&M. I think he'd be a big-time hire there. I think he's a good coach. I think his track record of developing quarterbacks is really second to none in college football. Now, he's had some trouble here as of late, but that's more about a bad Florida State offensive line than it is about Jimbo Fisher's coaching acumen. This is one to watch, although the thing about Fisher to Tennessee is the kind of thing I'd believe when I saw.
Always the offensive line's fault. You see that? I mean, the defense is terrible.
Have you seen that Florida State offensive line play?
They're not very good. They're not very good, but I'm just saying.
By the way, speaking of Mike Johnson, his love for offensive linemen, a side of Mike Johnson that you have never seen before we're done. At least I hadn't seen it before. I was blown away. And I give Mike a hard time. I was very impressed with a side of Mike I haven't seen. That's for our champion of life. We'll do that before we kind of close out our show. Also, Bill Hancock, College Football Playoff Executive Director, join us here in just a couple minutes as well. For now, though, let's move on to item number 9 on our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. And speaking of the College Football Playoff, a College Football Playoff committee member, selection committee member, well, his day job he has no more. Jeff Long now out at the University of Arkansas. Probably bad news for Bret Bielema and kind of a weird turn for the Arkansas program.
Yeah, I think it's definitely bad news for Bret Bielema. I think when you look at the situation undergoing him, my question is this: how soon is it bad news for Bret Bielema? Because I don't know if you want an interim AD making a hire. I don't know if you want somebody stepping in before an AD is really be able to hire at Arkansas and then making all these decisions about coaching changes. That something they can't just take back. You can't just take that back a couple of months from now and all of a sudden you have somebody new, maybe an interim AD going out on a coaching search. I don't know if that'd be what Arkansas wants right now. Maybe it does in a way kind of save his job for a little bit.
Before it became what Bret Bielema said on the coaches teleconference today, the SEC coaches teleconference, he is obviously not aware of a lot of what's going on here. Here was what Bret Bielema said on that front. Just walked out of a staff meeting, haven't received any notification. Jeff's been awesome from day one. Everything he stands for in the sport he's given. Hope it continues moving forward. So obviously he feels some affection for Long here. And it seems like a weird situation where maybe Long just sort of lost communication with the Arkansas fan base, maybe Arkansas boosters, maybe a little too complacent in a season in which Arkansas has obviously not been succeeding in the football field.
Yeah, I think I have so many questions too, because you look at Jeff Long, and obviously he's been the face of that college football playoff committee for the last few years, and I've always thought that guy's a slam dunk AD. I mean, he's a guy that you love to kind of have at the helm of your athletic program, but I think you're right, it kind of falls out of favor. It's a guy that shows up to the Board of Trustees meeting a couple of days ago and is not allowed into the meeting. I think that's a story in and of itself, but I think he has a lot of respect when you go around the college football community. I think he'll definitely land another job. I think the biggest question right now, like you said, is about what Bret Bielema in the future in the next couple of months holds.
All right, let me give you an idea how the next couple of minutes are going to unfold here on AT&T SEC Country Live. First of all, I'll remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless Direct TV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Bill Hancock, the executive director of the College Football Playoff, he's here with us in our Atlanta studios. We're going to bring him on the set here in just a moment. Before that, we got a couple more things we want to tell you about, including in a moment a look back to the past, one of the great moments in SEC history and potentially a historical twist here that's impacting the SEC even right now. We'll do that coming up before we bring on Bill Hancock. For now, though, let's do item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And you and I both had kind of the same thought about this. So apparently there's a bet going on. This is friendly wager. This is not anything too serious. Hopefully that's not the kind of thing the NCAA gets involved with. But Charles Barkley goes on a radio show in Birmingham, WJOX. He tells Ryan Brown, one of the hosts, Brown tweets this out, that on the JOX roundtable that he and Jalen Hurts have an Iron Bowl jersey bet. Hurts is going to wear an Auburn jersey on campus, and Barkley's going to wear an Alabama jersey on the NBA on TNT, where Auburn to win this game. To me, this feels like kind of a lopsided bet.
It's definitely a lopsided bet.
Charles Barkley on TV has done all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
I mean, that's a TV show, sort of anything for ratings is kind of the mindset.
Yeah.
But Hurts, if he has to wear an Auburn jersey, no pun intended, that's going to hurt a lot of Alabama fans' feelings.
It's definitely a lopsided bet. You're talking about a kind of a sports personality right now, Charles Barkley. I mean, he's a guy,
a jokester, a big gregarious personality.
He's interviewed Nick Saban. He's done a bunch of crazy things. If you have a sitting Alabama quarterback that was once SEC Player of the Year, and he has to wear an Auburn jersey, walking across the quad there in Tuscaloosa, I'm telling you right now, I would fall out. I think I talk for a lot of Alabama people when I say I would just flat fall out on the ground. I could not picture Jalen Hurts wearing an Auburn jersey of all things.
I think one thing's for sure, if Alabama, Mike Johnson, the Alabama alumnus, feels that way, I think a lot of other Alabama fans probably do as well. I love the idea of Hurts joking around with Charles Barkley. I think this is all in good fun, but if it turns out to be an Auburn victory, it's not going to be a lot of fun for Alabama fans on the Alabama campus around Tuscaloosa when that happens. Good to have you with us here today on AT&T SEC Country Live. In just a moment, we're going to bring in Bill Hancock, the executive director of the College Football Playoff. We'll talk to him about the rankings from last night and a big event coming to Atlanta to close up this college football season, the national championship game, the end of it all this season, happening in one of the places we think of as the capital city for college football, Atlanta. Before we get to that, though, let me remind you that each and every week here on AT&T SEC Country Live, we love looking back to the past. We call it our Seasons Remember, brought to you by Tony Sachery's, tailgate champion since 1972. If you're looking to spice up your next tailgate, look no further than the folks at Tony Sachery's. Tony Sachery's makes everything taste great. And now, with a look back to the past, let's take a look at Tony Sachery's Seasons to Remember, and I'll look back at 2010.
Tony Sachery's presents Seasons to Remember and a look back at 2010. A national championship year for Auburn, led by Heisman quarterback Cam Newton and offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn. The feelings generated that season on the Plains are reminiscent of the atmosphere around Auburn these days as well, as Malzahn once again has the Tigers in the national championship hunt. But SEC fans are also thinking back to 2010 for a different reason this week, because in that season's national title game, Auburn beat Oregon and coach Chip Kelly, who emerged this week as a candidate to replace Jim McElwain at Florida. Could Kelly's high-powered offense be doing battle with a lot more SEC defenses in the near future? Only time will tell. Elsewhere in the SEC, 2010 was a good year for South Carolina, which won the East for the only time in program history, giving Steve Spurrier his 8th trip to the SEC championship game. Just one of the things that makes 2010 a season to remember. Tony Sachery.
And it's great to have you back here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Of course, my name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. It's a great pleasure of us to welcome in Bill Hancock, the executive director of the College Football Playoff, here to our Atlanta studios. And obviously, when you think about Atlanta, you think about a great national championship game coming up later on this season. It's great to have you on our show to talk about that and so much more. Welcome to the program here today.
Happy to be here. Always glad to be back in Atlanta. Feels like I'm coming home again, even though I never lived in Georgia. Love this place.
Well, I have to say that I am an Atlanta native, and one of the things that I'm the most proud of when it comes to my hometown is the relationship that this sport, college football, which is my favorite, has with Atlanta. I think of Atlanta as in a lot of ways one of the capital cities of college football. And from your perspective with the College Football Playoff, how important is it to have the national championship game in a place like Atlanta, which loves this sport so much?
Well, it's fun to come here. Obviously, in the heart of the SEC, got a lot of ACC influence, but people from all over the country. When I come here and talk about college football, I say, tell me where you're from. Penn State, Texas, Illinois, Ohio State, all over. And that's a great thing about Atlanta, is the cosmopolitan nature of it. But we try to take the event around, so the first 10 years of the playoff, it will be in a different city every year. We like to expose big-time college football to people who don't see it. So cool to be in Atlanta, but also cool to take it around.
And you know, Mike, we were talking about this before the show. In addition to exposure to college football and taking it around the country, a lot of folks in Atlanta are going to be exposed to more than just a football game. There's a lot of stuff going on with this.
Yeah, listen, I mean, B.A.'s an Atlanta native. He's a guy who obviously has grown up here and stayed here. I'm a guy that's from Florida, but I love the things that go on in Atlanta. One of the things I loved about having the Final Four was being able to show up and see the music acts you guys announced today, the Chainsmokers, Darius Rucker, another couple of people that are going to be a part of all the festivities downtown.
Yeah, I lobbied for the Beatles. We just couldn't quite get that done.
Yeah, not so much.
In the old days, we would just open the stadium and have people come watch the games. And those days are gone. We've learned, and how silly we were for all those years not to do this, but we've learned to make activities available for people in the community besides the game. The game's the feature, don't get me wrong, but we have the concerts, we have the fan festival, we have a 5K run, taste of the championship. There's lots of ways that people here in Atlanta and around the Southeast can touch the CFP championship game.
Has it been fun for you? I mean, obviously a playoff, and I speak as a college football fan who wanted this for a long time before it came to be in 2014. Has it been fun for you watching how it's grown in stature? You mentioned the events going on around, both charitable and sort of fan relation events. Is it fun for you to watch the game become more than a game and become this really big event that people will sort of circle on their calendar? As a guy who kind of oversees a lot of this, how much fun has it been for you watching this growth take place?
Yeah, it's really fun. And I was director of the Final Four before I came over to this, so I've enjoyed seeing the growth in the Final Four and the way that they reached out to fans in the community, which Atlanta people will get to see next year. We started the playoff. It's only been 5 years since we started it back in the summer of 2012, and it's been a successful beyond our imagination. This will be the 80th Final Four coming up this year, and only the 4th college football playoff. And already we're on a great level.
Well, you mentioned Final Fours. We've had Final Fours in our hometown of Atlanta at the Georgia Dome, and obviously the Georgia Dome was a big building for a lot of college football games. But this year for the national championship game, the scene shifts to the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, a brand new venue. Everyone that's been in it talks about what a palace this is for football and all kinds of events. How much fun is it for you to be able to put this national championship game in a brand new building like Mercedes-Benz Stadium? And what do you think about that as a backdrop for college football?
Oh, it's really fun. And what I think primarily is all those players who get to come and play in that stadium will go home and say, hey, we played in a world-class stadium. And for many of them, they won't ever play in a stadium that nice ever again, but they'll have the memory that we got to go play the championship game in that stadium. It is off the charts spectacular. Very well designed, but also really well operated. And Atlanta people may not pay attention, I do as somebody in the business, to how well trained the staff is. They're friendly, they're happy, they're knowledgeable. It's a great stadium.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and listen, I have to agree with you on that, but let's get to the teams that are possibly going to be there. I think, obviously this being SEC country, we're still looking at the Iron Bowl in a couple of weeks. It'll play out. Georgia and Auburn just got done playing a big game. When you look at the SEC fans and how passionate they are, how excited do you get about the possibility of one of these SEC teams getting in the Final Four?
Well, we had great passion all 3 years. We had great passion last year in Tampa, obviously with Alabama and Clemson, but all 3 years have been great. The first year, Ohio State and Oregon, full house, screaming people, passionate people, just a wonderful tribute to college football. I think what we would see in Atlanta, what we will see, no matter who's here, is lots of people coming to town without tickets, just wanting to participate. And goodness, if we happen to get one of the regional teams here, all that would be magnified.
So on our show every day, we take comments. You can see them kind of coming in right now, even as we're talking. And one of the things those comments are filled up with this time of year is, hey, my team wasn't ranked where I thought it should be. I thought they should be ranked higher. I thought this team should be ranked lower. As a guy who sort of serves in your role as executive director of the college football playoff, how much do you enjoy seeing the debate that happens around this sport this time of year?
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love the passion. I love to see that list of questions come in by text. I did a Reddit conversation last month and got, 300 questions that I could only had an hour to deal with. So I love talking to people about college football. about their teams, about the teams they don't like quite as much.
There is some of that.
A lot of that on this
tiny bit of that. And I know you guys never get criticized for anything you say.
Oh, never.
I know
that. That's never going to happen. But speaking of our fans, we have folks watching all around SEC country right now. If they want to be a part of some of the action for the national championship game here in Atlanta when it comes around, is there a website that they can go to if they want to connect to find more about the college football playoff? Where would you direct folks to find out more about what's going on?
Yeah, I'd go to the College Football Playoff website. I had a lot of information on there, particularly about what's happening in Atlanta. And I just say to folks, come and be a part of this. Touch it, even if you may not have a game ticket. Come and be around it, because you will, in 40 years, there'll be a college football playoff, and you'll be able to say, hey, I got to go experience the 4th one in Atlanta. Well, that'll be pretty cool.
It's a real honor to have the national championship game in Atlanta to close it this season. And Mr. Hancock, it's a great pleasure to have you here today on AT&T SEC Country Live as well.
Great being with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
I will remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. And now with a look at some of the big national games that are going to impact those college football playoff rankings at the end of the season, let's take a look at our AT&T Look Ahead.
It's now time for the AT&T Look Ahead as we take a look at some of the top national games happening around college football this weekend. Of course, kind of a week off in terms of major showdowns. That'll mostly take place next week as a lot of big-time college football powers have rivalry week. But for this week, still some games to pay attention to. Maybe the biggest of them all comes from the Big Ten, where Michigan takes on Wisconsin. Wisconsin team riding high, still undefeated after a win against Iowa last week, and looking to do battle with Jim Harbaugh and Michigan this week, who do appear in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's top 25. A terrific proving ground to find out if Wisconsin has what it takes to be a part of the College Football Playoff. Oklahoma, a week after a big win against TCU and 2 weeks removed from a rivalry win against Oklahoma State, will take on Kansas. The thought is this will be a little easier for the Sooners as they look to claim a Big 12 title and a spot also in the College Football Playoff. Miami knocked off Notre Dame last week. It stays undefeated and hosts Virginia this week. Do the Hurricanes still have the mental makeup and the psychological energy to take on the Cavaliers? Well, if they don't, my guess is the turnover chain will prove to be helpful there. And the Pac-12 probably eliminated from the College Football Playoff conversation, but the highest-rated team from out west, USC, has a rivalry game against UCLA. One of the top national games this week as well, and that's a look at all of those with your AT&T Look Ahead.
So I love Jeremy Pettis, one of our Alabama fans who watches the show in the comment section. We're talking to Bill Hancock, the executive director of the College Football Playoff Committee. He says, hey, I got a question. Ask him, which team's been in the College Football Playoff all 3 years in its existence? Some of y'all don't stop even in the midst of something like that. Alabama fans still very proud of what they're doing, what they have going on. And right now, those Alabama fans do have a lot to be proud of. As we said to start our show, #1 in the country with Auburn #6. That Iron Bowl showdown is going to be fantastic. And you look at Georgia still there as well. It is going to be a really fun ride here towards the end of the season.
Yeah, there's a lot of pride, obviously, from Alabama fans over the last few years. And I wanted to tell Bill Hancock, I was in Tampa last year. I was in Phoenix the year before. I went down to the Sugar Bowl when Alabama played Ohio State. They do such a good job of putting on this entire production. You know, we mentioned the concerts and everything around that game. I think it's going to be another special year. Hopefully, Alabama makes its way there again.
And one of the things we'll have to see is, can the SEC still kind of get involved in that sort of 2 playoff team conversation? That still feels like a bit of a long shot. But yeah. I think if you are an SEC fan, I tell you all the time, I'm a big SEC homer. In addition to the fact that I'm a Georgia fan, I like the SEC. It's my favorite conference. And while I'm no Auburn fan, I'm no Alabama fan, I do love the idea of 3 teams still in the mix this late in the season. That's a bragging right that the Pac-12 can't say right now. I don't think the Big Ten can say that right now. Really no league has that kind of sort of talent at the top. 3 teams still in the mix here.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing to look at. How many times this year have we talked about the possibility of the SEC being down, the turnover in head coaches, the quarterbacks not playing out like you thought they would, but at the end of the year, even if the league is a little bit top-heavy, there's still 3 SEC teams in the top 7, and I think that's something to be proud of.
All right, we're going to close out the show the way we do every day, and now Butch Jones is no longer the coach of Tennessee, but he gave us the gift of Champions of Life, and we still look for Champions of Life here on AT&T SEC Country Live, and I don't quite know how this came up on yesterday's show. For those of you who don't know, and I say it a lot, Mike was the All-American offensive lineman at Alabama, terrific college career, but goes on to play the NFL for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, I didn't know this until yesterday. How did this come up on the show?
This came up, we were showing the video of the guy that does the somersault.
Oh, that's right. I asked you if you could do this.
Yeah.
So yesterday we showed, that's right, for our Champion of Life yesterday was an offensive lineman for a Division III school who took the lateral on a hook and ladder play and flipped into the end zone to score a touchdown. And I said, Mike, the offensive lineman, have you ever done something like that before? Well, come to find out, unbeknownst to me, now the people who work with us did know this. Apparently you spend a lot more time talking to Michael and Roxy and the gang here behind the scenes.
I keep my distance from BA before we go on.
Than you do to me, because they all knew this. I did not know that Mike Johnson, as an offensive lineman, caught a tackle-eligible touchdown for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, we have actually found video of this. We had to go back to the dark ages. This is in black and white, leather helmets from, a bygone era when Mike played the game. But look at Mike, from Matt Ryan, catching a touchdown here at the NFL. And I love the broadcaster's description of this. Take a listen. That's Roddy White. That's not Mike. But here we go. The throw by Ryan. The pass is caught.
Mike Johnson, of all the guys in the building.
We got tackles scoring touchdowns, baby.
So you hear Wes Durham there, the Falcons radio play-by-play announcer, saying, of all the guys in the building, Mike Johnson caught it. And then who was that said we got tackle scoring
That's
touchdown?
Todd McClure, LSU great Todd McClure. I mean, a 13-year Atlanta vet, obviously, and had a great career down in Baton Rouge.
So I got to tell you, I sit next to you every day, and this is not me being funny or anything like that. Because Michael actually showed me a lot of video of this. There was some other stuff that was on the internet of the touchdown. I got to tell you, I am legit impressed. You caught an NFL. I mean, you played in the league for a long time. You had a very good career, but catching a touchdown is a different kind of thing.
It definitely was. And I think what's the most important part of it for me is when you look around at what else was on the field. The other options for Matt Ryan out of the backfield: Tony Gonzalez, Roddy White, Michael Turner, and somehow the ball found its way into my hands. I still don't know how.
Julian Solano in the comment section says, "Big man touchdown." That's exactly what it was, and that's a real point of brag. Listen, if I scored a touchdown in an NFL game, I'd wear a T-shirt every day that said that. I'd brag about that every day. So the fact that I had to find this out on my own sort of speaks well of you probably as well. Hey, thanks for being here this day on AT&T SEC Country Live. We appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. In between now and then, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. If you'll give us a rating and review, that's a huge help. Just lets folks know that we're talking about the SEC each and every day here. And another way you can help us out and share our shows by sharing it with your friends on Facebook. We do AT&T SEC Country Live every Monday through Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It's great to have you with us. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Y'all have a great day.